All right, let's dive into a fascinating little puzzle, one that's been hiding in plain sight in the New Testament for centuries. You've probably heard of the book of Hebrews, right? Well, there's this one chapter, chapter 11, that's often called the Hall of Faith. It's basically a list of all these incredible heroes from the Old Testament, but one verse in particular is, well, it's a bit strange. Let's find out why. So here they are, the names listed in Hebrews 11, verse 32. The author says he's running out of time, so he just lists them off. Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David and Samuel and the prophets. On the surface, it looks like a pretty standard list of famous Bible figures. But if you know your Old Testament, you might be looking at this and thinking, wait a minute, something's not quite right here. And that is the mystery. This list is totally out of chronological order. I mean, Barak lived before Gideon, and Samuel was a huge deal way before David was even on the scene as king. So what's going on? Was it just a simple mistake? Did the author just randomly jot down some names? Or is there something way deeper happening? Well, according to the source for our explainer, a commentary by E.W. Bullinger, this was absolutely not a mistake. Bullinger argues that the author of Hebrews wasn't being sloppy at all. In fact, he was doing the opposite. He was crafting a deliberate, almost poetic literary pattern. To really get it, though, we first need to understand a specific writing trick.
It's called introversion, but you might know it by its more common name, chiasmus. Think of it like a literary sandwich or a mirror image. You start with idea A, then you introduce idea B, then you circle back to a version of idea B, and you finish by coming back to idea A. It creates this really cool symmetry and forces you to compare the paired elements. And it turns out the person who wrote Hebrews was an absolute master of this.
Now, check this out. This is where it gets really clever. When you apply that ABBA structure to the first four names on the list, who were all judges of Israel, a pattern just jumps out at you. The A parts, Gideon and Jephthah, are on the outside. They're paired because their stories highlight their independent faith. But look at the middle, the B parts, Barak and Samson. They are put side by side for a very specific reason. Their stories are completely tangled up with women. And this just perfectly shows that mirror effect. On one side, you've got Barak. He was called into his mission by the prophetess Deborah, and his victory was sealed by another woman, Jael. So he was helped by two women. Then you look at Samson. His story is the exact opposite. He was betrayed by two women, first his Philistine wife, and then, of course, Delilah. It's a perfect, tragic parallel. The order isn't a mistake. It's a message. Okay, so knowing that structure is there, let's zoom in on that first hero, Gideon. We need to understand the kind of faith that's being celebrated. His story is so much more than that famous battle with just 300 men. It's really a story about how God carefully prepared him for the job. And the key to understanding Gideon's whole journey is the number 7. In the Bible, 7 is a big deal. It often symbolizes spiritual completeness or perfection. So before Gideon ever led an army or did anything heroic, God spoke to him 7 separate times, building him up piece by piece. Let's just walk through this process because it's amazing. It all starts with number 1, the call. God tells him, the Lord is with you, just to get his attention. Then comes number 2, the challenge. Go in this might of yours, which, ironically, just makes Gideon realize how weak he is. So at 3, God gives him the promise, surely I will be with you, to build up his trust. Number 4 is the waiting, which shows God's patience with him. Then at 5 comes the acceptance, a sign that God is with him. With that confidence, God gives him number 6, the peace. Peace be unto thee, fear not. And only after all that preparation, does God finally give him the command to act. Throw down the altar of Baal. So you see what's happening here, right? This is the crucial takeaway. The real story of Gideon's faith started long before any battles. It started with him just listening. You could say God had to do a work in Gideon before Gideon could ever do a work for God. It was all about shaping the man on the inside before he could be a hero on the outside. And you want to know where Gideon's real strength came from? It wasn't confidence or bravado. It was from knowing just how weak he was. When God calls him a mighty warrior, this is Gideon's response. He admits he's from the weakest clan, the least in his family, and that is what forced him to rely completely on God's strength, not his own. Okay, now let's go back to that other pair in the middle of our structure, Barak and Samson. Now, Bullinger argues that to get these guys, we have to understand their specific time and place. We can't just slap our 21st century values on them and expect it to make sense. Let's start with Barak. His big victory wasn't just some random war. The enemy, this guy King Jaban, was carrying out a really specific and pretty awful kind of oppression. They were systematically kidnapping Israelite women as spoils of war. So Barak's mission was a direct response to a crisis that targeted women. And the Bible makes this super clear. The enemy's victory song literally celebrates getting a damsel or two for every soldier. So what does God do in response? He raises up Deborah, who calls herself a mother in Israel, a protector. And who strikes the final blow? Another woman, Jael, who is called blessed above women. The solution was a perfect answer to the specific problem. Now, Samson is an even tougher case, right? A lot of his moral choices look questionable, to put it mildly. But Bullinger makes a really sharp point here. He says we just can't judge Samson by our modern standards because God was working differently in that era. These stories are here for our learning, not so we can look down our noses and criticize. I mean, this is pretty wild, but the book of Judges actually says that Samson's decision to marry a Philistine woman, which was normally a big no-no, was actually from the Lord. God was using Samson's entire life, including his flaws, as a way to stir up trouble for Israel's enemies. In that context, his faith was all about fulfilling the very strange, very specific mission he was born for. So what's the big idea here? What's the thread that ties all these people, Gideon, Barak, Samson, together? It's definitely not that they were perfect. I mean, not even close. The connection is something way more basic. For every single one of them, their faith, the kind of faith that changes the world, was a response. It all started when they heard a specific message from God for their specific situation. Gideon heard those 7 words of preparation. Barak heard the command through Deborah. Samson lived out the prophecy he'd heard about his whole life. Faith for them wasn't some blind leap in the dark. It was a confident step forward because they had heard a word. And that right there brings the lesson from this ancient, super clever list right into our lives today. The principle is exactly the same. The heroes of faith were, first and foremost, people who listened. And that leaves us with a pretty challenging question to think about. In all the noise and chaos of our own time, are we even listening?